Hello and welcome for a Tuesday edition of the Scotland Rugby News podcast with me, your host, Bruce Aitchison from Happiness Egg Shaped, and my pal, the regular, Mr. Gavin Harper from Scotland Rugby News. Hello, sir. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Enjoying more sunny weather, which is I'm getting far too used to saying that. We did have a wee bit of rain yesterday, but not all good, and looking forward to a big weekend of URC quarterfinals.
Yeah, it was a strange one at the weekend. None of that happening. Melrose Simmons, obviously, and a few other bits and pieces. Finn carving things up and enjoying himself, and Bordeaux doing some nice things. So plenty to talk about, and we've got a special guest on. So let's try and get there more quickly. Quick word from our sponsor, though, before we go. The Scotland Rugby News podcast is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV. With thousands of jobs across Scotland, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs. Start your search today. So big news broke on Friday, Gav. I don't know how the timing went about GB Sevens, with Melrose Sevens being at the weekend and Bournemouth Sevens to the biggest in the calendar. Interesting times. So good news that we've got a special guest with us tonight.
Yeah, I think important to get that kind of first-hand insight. But look, not more sort of bad news for Sevens, and obviously it doesn't seem to have necessarily been done in that great a sort of fashion. So look, it's not good that GB Sevens is going to be sort of camps and competitions rather than in full time. So yeah, I suppose we can. We've got Kaleem Baretto to come on and talk, so I'm sure he can give us a bit more detail around what it means and how it all kind of played out.
Yeah, Kaleem's found it tough having been injured, but he's a massive advocate for the game. Played for Scotland, playing for GB, trying to get things going, trying to drum up a bit of interest and activity around it, and then a bombshell gets dropped on Friday. So let's not waste any more time and bring in one of our favourites, Mr. Kaleem Baretto.
Hi, Kaleem.
Well, thank you.
Good to see you. I would rather it was in happier terms and to tell us about a bright future. I was at Melrose from Thursday, and I was with Kieran Beattie on Friday night, who sounded quite positive about things. And I was telling me I've got players at Bournemouth, and I've got players here, and I've got players there, and things. And then, a press release comes out, and it just seemed like it quite literally set the cat amongst the pigeons. Are you able to give us a bit of detail into the announcement, Kaleem?
So I believe P3, etc., everyone involved was notified that we'd have a meeting. I was actually down in London just for an injury consultation 2 weeks post. So I met with a couple of the boys there, and then Tom Emery notified or put a message in the group saying that the unions respectively would meet us on the Friday morning. So the next day, thereon, I think we had a 9 a.m. meeting scheduled. The RFU had the English players, WRU had the Welsh players, and us alone were done with the SRU. That's when we were notified of the news.
And the news is what?
Plain and simply that as much as they're putting it out there that it's camp-based, etc., it's a bit funny because currently we're on a camp-based model, just essentially no contracts next year, so 50 jobs lost if you're to speak about it frank. So redundancy for everyone essentially.
And as you've moved through the programme, was this something that you were aware of being a situation that could potentially happen, or were you just trying to play and be a professional rugby player without really dealing in any of the, I suppose this is a political move?
I guess you're always aware of the state of the game globally. Sevens in the UK, obviously amalgamating to GB was a point at which there was a bit of friction, and that was through a bit of forced pressure. I'd say you'd never be surprised with things that happen at GB, but it's probably one of those moments that were taken aback. I think although things haven't been great, it's not conducive to the best performance. We've slowly been improving, firstly as a team, especially with the change post-Olympic cycle. And in terms of the facilities, the amount of camps we had, etc., last year was just a little bit of a step up. So you could say we were trending in the right direction. And then I'd say this was unexpected, at least when you think of bad news or anticipate bad news for us. I thought it would be maybe a few less contracts, maybe a couple less meet times, touch points, camps, but definitely not this.
When you saw the announcement from Ireland, did that, what was the impact of that amongst the group?
Well, it's tough. I guess Ireland were at a point where they knew we were probably going to be relegated from what was called Series 1 to Series 2. There were whispers that their funding was going to be cut a little bit throughout the series, so it wasn't as much of an immediate shock. And I guess I was probably truthfully quite ignorant to the fact that GB would face a somewhat similar situation. And so it was definitely unexpected for me, at least personally.
Kaleem, I'm interested in that meeting, and I don't know how much you are able to sort of tell us about the meeting, but the quotes in the press release that were put out were attributed to David Nucifora. He's presumably away with the Lions. Was he in that meeting?
He was not in the meeting, but I believe much of what was said, etc., has come from him. I think he's quite openly an advocate of the game of sevens on paper. Plenty of stuff on LinkedIn, etc. He's not hiding it, but he's obviously tied up a little bit now, I imagine, with the summer and what's ahead, as well as all the changes going on in the SRU, etc. It's a bit of a tough time to keep track of. Yeah.
Can you tell us who was in that meeting? Who kind of delivered the news to you? And then I suppose is that David Nucifora is an advocate for sevens, so is it doubly frustrating that you've got a guy there who seems to be kind of banged the drum for sevens in a previous job, but not for you guys?
So in the meeting was Stevie Gemmell and Alistair Marshall. I don't think that needs to be a hidden fact. And regards to Nucifora, you know what? It's tough because no matter how much one is an advocate, at the end of the day, everything comes down to financial stability and your return on investment in a game. And I'm never going to put the blame on one person or one union. I think it's just a collective of pretty tough decisions from the top down, not just involving the unions, World Rugby, etc., globally. So I think it's just a knock-on effect. Is there, in my opinion, a lack of interest or value seen in sevens? But I don't think I need to say it. I think it's pretty obvious.
Yeah, one of the reasons that's been given is that lack of players moving from sevens into 15s. But is it about more than that? It's clearly there. Do you feel there's more to gain from sevens than just being a development tool for 15s?
Yeah, for sure. And maybe I'm biased because if you were to look at me on paper now, the age I am, etc., you'd probably categorize me as more of a sevens player now as opposed to someone who could jump across the formats. The thing is, whether even as GB, which is the toughest thing, we had last year negotiations between our head coach Rock. He would speak to Prem clubs because we were based in London, etc., back and forward, and he was open to bringing in some players, developing them. I mean, I don't think it's any secret how much this game exposes you and really brings on people and players, especially your back three, etc., and the levels they can bring. I mean, you just look at like Darcy Graham, Ross McCann most recently even has jumped across and he's done well. And I'm not saying that's a massive return on investment, but what I would say is there's never been a point at which they were like, let's actually work with GB sevens or work with the seven side, put a couple players in, bring them up to scratch, and then really push them forward in the 15s game. And I don't think that's something we couldn't do, but it's not something or a relationship that's clearly been worth building. And it's tough because when you talk about return on investment, you think about what teams are producing or providing that. And my opinion, this isn't fact, I assume bar maybe the men's first 15, etc., Scotland team financially are producing a bit back. I don't imagine many other sides from age grade, etc., are providing a financial return of investment, as most unions don't. So if it's player development, I mean, you've got two pro sides in Scotland. I would like to think you would see Scotland see the sevens as that third one to develop.
Yeah, we could go on for miles about that one. So the future then for you, the group who are contracted at the moment are still full-time contracted players until a certain point. How does the future then work? Do you sign something that says you're available for all those things coming, or do you have to notify availability for certain things and they pick a squad accordingly?
Truth of the matter, no one has a clue. I don't think, and when I say that, I don't mean just the players. I mean anyone. I think this has been an easy. The decision has allowed for it to take time. I mean, if you think about the series, doesn't start till end of November. If you were to say Dubai is the first marquee tournament, and until then, nothing really needs to happen based on the format they are moving to in the framework. So, realistically, end of July, contracts are up. We are full-time contractors, how they describe it, but I would say we're part-time contracted currently. And that essentially means guys are going to have to look for jobs. And when I say that, I mean coaches, staff, etc., everyone. So when it comes to selection, etc., I'm very intrigued to see how that works. And it might even be a case of booking some annual leave so you can get a little stint in Dubai or wherever. I have no idea. Is
that something that's realistic for you? Is it, you've been really open about your love of the game and your desire to spread the word and how important it is and to showcase the game and the players. But if you move on, education, employment, whatever it may be, do you think that's something that you can make yourself? I know you can't speak for anyone else, so really this is a Kaleem question. Are we likely to see Kaleem playing for GB moving forward?
Well, first I've got to get this injury dealt with, which I need to figure out how that works now, which has provided a little bit of a spanner in the works. So that's a tough one in its own story. Regards to that, truthfully, and I imagine I can speak on behalf of all the players, you have to firstly find some work. I mean, majority of guys are in that late 20s bracket. A couple of the younger guys can maybe find a bit of rugby elsewhere, but you're at the point where as you're more established sevens player, there's not as many opportunities unless you're happy to go to champ, etc. And still you got to be working. So if anything, it's work first, and then if you happen to be off or it happens to make sense or things change, then maybe. But I think you've got to put that as an afterthought currently.
Are you aware of anyone making moves, or has anybody been in touch to say, look, we're looking at this, we're gonna try and rescue it?
Not specifically. I mean, the amount of support, etc., has been amazing, but at the end of the day, it's all hearsay. We want sevens to be amazing. It's a great product, etc., and we've been banging that drum for the last few years. So, if anything is to be fruitful from it, I doubt it. But I know there's people pushing in the background, but I imagine they've been pushing in the background for some time.
Yeah, just Kaleem, on that, is there a temptation to say, actually, even if you were available, do you know what, stuff this, I'm done, because you've been through the sort of Scotland Sevens disbanding. Now you've had this, as you say, you and others have advocated for Sevens for a long time, but it feels like you're almost shouting into this sort of great void. Is there a temptation to just say, do you know what, like, I've done my bit, stuff it, I'm going to leave this to somebody else?
Yeah, definitely partially, but I'll always be someone who wants to play the highest level of sevens, and I'll always be an advocate of the game. If me being involved somehow managed to help that progress, then absolutely. And I'm probably in a unique situation where I didn't play last year. I'm not going to play a large amount this year coming, if that was even an option. And I'd love to be able to pull on the jersey again. The tough thing you're going to have now is the likelihood that team is made up of people who have never played sevens before. Is it uni students? Is it very fringe 15s teams players? And I've banned this drum, and people can believe me or not, you have this conversation usually around the Olympic time where you talk about the amazing 15s players coming over and playing the game of sevens, which completely is great, creates exposure for the game. DuPont, all those names, and a few guys can do it. But what people don't understand is the game is very different in terms of, if you want to be a sevens team, a player, you can be the best player in the game breaker, etc., on the invitational circuit in the 15s game. But if you can't play the game of sevens, which takes a bit of time, and I've got to be honest about that, then it's an extremely tough task. You see Spain, for example, second in the series this year, on paper maybe don't have the best players, best athletes per se compared to your Southern Hemisphere sides, etc. But as a team, they've had a bit of time, and a lot of other teams had changeover and turnover. And it just shows you what happens when you have a bit of consistency and actual sevens team.
It's mind-blowing to think countries, I mean, you just mentioned Spain, and because the sevens has gone behind a paywall, and because there's no Scotland, England, Wales, the interest unfortunately has diminished. But to think Spain, you've just mentioned, you've highlighted them as good practice, so they can see the desire, and they can see the prospect of sevens being a positive thing. Yet established unions are saying, well, actually, it's not for us. It blows my mind. And having been at the Melrose Sevens over the course, over the last few days, and you see the positivity around that and the way you can put on a show and engage a different audience. And you and I have spoken about this previously about having a different audience. It just smacks of short-sightedness, and I know it's money, and I can't pretend to understand that. When you think of the tournaments you've been at and the World Series, you're potentially looking at a World Series event without an Irish team and a GB team that isn't going to be at the standard. How do you see that impacting on the engagement of a Hong Kong crowd or a Dubai crowd?
Yeah, it's going to be tough. Like, realistically, I could be honest about it. If, let's say, worst case scenario, or it's a team with no sevens experience next year that GB goes on. Firstly, it's not going to look great in World Rugby. You're going to have a put together team of great British players who might be great athletes, great players. I'm not going to deny that. But competing against teams who have had a couple of years, 2, 3, 4 years together and know the game, it's like an extremely difficult task. Yeah, there's a lot of expats of those communities, and I keep hearing this, grow the game, sevens is the best way to grow the game. And actually, to be honest, even I'm getting sick of it because nothing happens on the back of it. No one's piggybacking it. There's no actual recognition or use of it. And the reason people are saying it grows the game is, look at your Brazil women, all these teams, China, etc. The World 15s game doesn't hit these sides of the worlds and these pinpoints. Argentina are one of the best men's teams on the circuit. And if you go around globally and we have this opportunity, that's why it's growing the game. And I think people need to get that or recognize that at least. It's not just about sevens feeding 15s. It's like sevens itself, especially as a festival atmosphere, etc. Yeah, it's amazing. You were at Melrose, you saw how many people join, have a day. It's not just about the rugby. Rugby is part of it, but it's the drinks, it's the socializing, the music, whatever it may be. And then it's also you're spreading the game across the globe, which 15s is a lot of tier 1 nations, and then how many people are watching tier 2 nations, etc. And with the way World Rugby is going and the damage it's going to do, I mean, let's say I'm a Uruguay, for example. If they've come up this year, they've beaten some really good teams throughout tournaments, but ultimately they've been relegated again. And they're going to be that team that's stuck in this thing of promotion, relegation. And as a union myself, I'd be like, what's the point? So there's a lot of questions. I don't know the true impact of it, but I just don't see how, if we go down this route, Great Britain survives.
When you mentioned that there, and Gordon Titchens was at Melrose to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, and he's just spent a heap of time with the Chinese women's squad. China can see value in bringing it someone like him in. He can see value in going offering himself to China, and he was talking about that. You've mentioned a few times, great athletes needed some refinement. He said they're hungry, they're desperate. They love the game. I can't see it. It breaks my heart, and because I know people like yourself who are directly affected by it, it's even tougher. Does this motivate you to be involved in the? I know as captain you were one of the leaders and the spokespeople. Does it motivate you to become a politician, to get involved, to lobby, to?
It's funny. Like I'll always be an advocate of it, but you have to be realistic. Like, how much does my voice make a difference? And it doesn't mean I'm going to stop. It's just like I've got to be quite honest about it. And I don't know how much I can champion or how much is truth or how much is listened to. And I'm sure I'm not the first person that's been doing it. And realistically, I don't know. I can't be ignorant and lie and say I don't know the business side. I don't know the financial side. I can tell you what's clearly obvious and in front of my face, and it's a simple fix, and I'm sure it's very tough at the same time. And that's from World Rugby down. For us, it's the unions. Above that, World Rugby are creating a really restricted movement on all the unions, and I don't know. And at the end of the day, it all comes down to money. We know how it is. It's a business, and I get that. Realistically, my dream would be that it ends up being franchises, and then maybe those last 3 tournaments are with your national team, and that's a cool model to go with. A bit more like the 15s, etc. I don't know, but that's going to require really millionaires to invest in it and see the value in it, which maybe there is. Maybe we find one, but I don't know. But I can only, I guess, every little helps as much as possible.
Could you take yourself to India and play on the new circuit they've got going there?
I am praying that goes well, and I think a lot of players, or a majority of players, are praying that model goes well, because that's where the game needs to go, realistically.
Kaleem, you said in your video on Friday that you posted on your sort of social media that one of the sort of hardest parts was getting your head around the idea you might have played your last game for GB7s, or certainly the last game, and it's current guys. Where are you at with injury and also the sort of emotion of it all?
I've been trying to. I probably actually haven't thought about it too much, because I don't know. It's been a lot of calls that have not produced very much. One of those, I guess, set amount of those few days. But for me, like I had obviously my long-term injury, had a few complications, and then I had to get surgery again, quite a big one. So that was set me up for another 12-month recovery, which I'm only 2-3 weeks into. So for me, that put me returning between like March and May next year, in which my idea was, maybe I'll be back for the last 3 or 4, in which it's up to a selection thing, and I guess just reinstilling a bit of love for the game. That looks very different now, and I guess personally, my challenges are figuring out how I'm going to best rehab and come back, and then I don't know where that leaves me. Maybe I try and go one of the tournaments, but it's just never. I don't know. I've already missed a year. I'm going to miss another year, really, and I don't know. It's a very weird ending. Probably not one I've had or quite processed. Not through any circumstance, but yeah, it's a bit tough.
No, I hear you, brother. Kaleem, listen, I really appreciate you coming on and talk to us and giving us your honesty, as you always do. I'm not often lost for words, but I'm genuinely not sure what to say. I've looked at your social media and the stuff you've posted, and like you say, there's a lot of support. There's a lot of people reaching out. I think it's one of those situations where people don't actually know how to help. They're offering help, but they don't actually know how to help. I'm probably in that bracket myself. And I am aware there is a group who are looking at, I think they were actually due to meet, it's maybe Thursday. I think there's, like you say, a little private group of individuals who are passionate about sevens and want to make something happen, and it'll be interesting to see what they can make happen. I hope it goes well for you, and if there's anybody watching or anything we could do, I think we'll be doing it for good guys like yourself. But thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it, guys. Thanks for the time.
All best, Kaleem. Thanks.
Cheers, guys.
I'm not really sure how to follow that. I just I've got to know Kaleem, and he's a fantastic human. A very good rugby player, but he's a fantastic human. And a lot of what he was doing, especially when he picked up his injury, was for the benefit of other people. He was championing things. He's definitely an advocate, and he's appeared at things. He's spoken well. It just feels like an absolute kick in the teeth. And it's a really sad sign for the game in general, not just sevens, for the game in general, because it's people.
Yeah, I mean,
I can't. That point I asked, like, I spoke to a few people over the weekend. I cannot imagine a Hong Kong sevens without British representation in it.
And I think the part that Kaleem referenced that worries me is, at what point is it just, GB will be there, but we're ticking a box to send a GB team, and actually they won't be competitive, or certainly not to the level that these guys have been.
I can't see who's available. I can't. Clubs are unlikely going to release somebody to go and play sevens.
There's loads of practical, like, how does it work for somebody like Kaleem in terms of insurance and all that stuff that I can't get my head around at the minute with the information that's sort of out there. I think the other thing, you're right, clubs aren't going to release players, or if they do, to Kaleem's point, they're going to be, kids. There'll be academy players who are not ready for first team rugby at Premiership, URC level. That's clearly that's going to be a drop in standard from the guys we've got now. Yes, it might help them in developing into club players, but we've lost that element of the next Darcy Graham, the next Magnus Bradbury. We're not going to get that now from the GB setup. So yeah, look, it's.
And I've bumped my gums about caps being given away for games that maybe wouldn't have been capped internationals. To represent Great Britain should be an up from representing Scotland, England, Wales. Ellie Kildunn came into the women's sevens squad. Anton Dupont comes into the sevens squad. 15s players come in because it's an up. It's a desirable thing to be part of. And sevens is not part of the Commonwealth Games, and Australia couldn't afford the Commonwealth Games, so we're now back to it being money. I can't get my head around these things. It makes me sad.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not. I think Kaleem's insight and his kind of honesty it's important to hear that, and exactly how it was done, I think, is important as well, because I think there are a lot of assumptions made that these things are all dealt with in a way, but to find out how exactly the players found out, I think is important. The fact that, look, there have been instances before when these announcements are made and actually players don't have a heads up or have knowledge of the fact it's coming. So I think that says that maybe the unions have tried to get ahead of the game and maybe do the right thing. But look, I still think from a Scottish point of view, the fact that we are 27th of May, 2 months post Six Nations, and we haven't heard from David Nucifora, Alex Williamson about any of this stuff, not just the sevens, about Gregor Townsend's future, about anything. I know Nucifora's away with the Lions now, but I'm going off on a tangent here, but I don't think it's certainly, I would, and I'm sure most of my colleagues would welcome the chance to ask him questions. So, to me, that's a missed opportunity.
I had a brilliant time at Melrose Mix. I got to speak to Rob Moffat. I got to speak to Gordon Titchens. I was speaking to some of the coaches, the invitational teams, and various others. And the point I kept coming back to, and I can't remember who I first had this discussion with years ago, and Kaleem mentioned it. There's the player pathway, and we only have 2 professional teams in this country. So the players have missed that pathway. But what we're also missing is the chance for somebody to be a head coach. John DL, Callum McRae have been head coaches of the sevens. Callum McRae is now head coach at Benetton. John DL is a British Lions coach. They were able to cut their teeth in a professional environment with Scotland Sevens. They were managing a professional program. We're now missing another opportunity for strength and conditioning coaches to work in a professional environment, physios, medics, team managers, liaison, where we've taken out a whole level or opportunity or path. I don't know, but it just, how can the country that gave sevens to the world not have value for the game of sevens? It's like England going, do you know what? We're not going to bother with cricket. It breaks my heart. It absolutely breaks my heart. Anyway, Let's move on. Let's start at Glasgow. I saw Scotland Rugby News on social media saying which one of the two teams is going to go the furthest. Glasgow Stormers at Scotstoun, people returning. There must be a pretty positive mood about the camp. I know you've been along the M8 today.
Yes, I think it's interesting, Glasgow, because you look at what they've done in the last month, and all of a sudden, people, including me, are starting to panic and saying, well, hang on a minute, this actually doesn't look that great. But last year, and I know the circumstances are slightly different with injuries, last year they were beaten in South Africa twice, came back and were shocking against Zebre. Very, very low. Lucky probably to win that game. And then all of a sudden, the quarter-final came. And actually, I was looking the other day, they didn't blow the Stormers away. It wasn't like Glasgow won by 40 points. They were running in tries from left, right and centre, but they did enough to get themselves into the semi-final. And then in the semi-final, they were outstanding in Thomond Park. But actually, again, they had to be, it wasn't like the typical Glasgow. So I think, although the results haven't been great, I think they'll be confident that they can draw on that experience. I think the big difference this year is, number one, they're missing Xander. I think that's a huge loss. And as I've said before, massive, massive shoes to fill. Jack Dempsey's still out. That's obviously a blow. But I think that's lessened by the fact that you bring back Sione, Hugh Jones. There are guys there with loads of experience, but also with the attributes that in Glasgow's game plan can give them front football and all that stuff. And then they get Henkel Venter back this week. Jack Mann looks like he's going to be fit. So that tide maybe has turned a wee bit in Glasgow's favour for Friday night.
It's also at Scotstoun, and I see on social media, they've got videos for like Sir George Horn saying, get yourself along and let's create an atmosphere. I think if the Glasgow support can get it right, we talk every week about Scotstoun being a horrible place for away teams to go to. And if the support can get riled up and really go for it right from the kickoff and become that, whatever cliche you want to give it, 16th man, I see Glasgow winning. I think you're right, it's been bumpy, but maybe they had to go through that. And now it's showtime, like it's playoff time. This is, it's the Alex Ferguson, it's the Michael Jordan. Right now it matters. Now we're going to see the caliber of the team, and they're the reigning champions. They'll be desperate to go deeper.
Yeah, I think the bit that and Franco's talked loads about this, and I remember during one of his first sort of chats, I think it was almost pre-season, and he said, make no mistake, we are now every single team's cup final. Every team wants to knock off the champions. Yeah. And I think that has been, you've seen that, like teams are coming to, you look at the Bulls as the prime example. They were out for revenge, whether they want to admit it or not, when they came to Scotstoun a few weeks ago. I think, I'm not saying that you lose that completely, but that definitely decreases when you're in the playoffs, because I think that tag of defending champions, well, there's only 8 teams left, and I just think everybody's out to go as far as they can for their own reasons, rather than to wave a flag and say, oh, look at us, we beat the champions. I think it becomes less of a factor. Look, the fact that Glasgow are at Scotstoun, yeah, I think they'll win, but I think it will take some smart game management. I think the weather forecast, although looking outside here, is blue skies again. The weather forecast for Friday night might require a jacket. Doesn't look that clever. might the familiarity of home surroundings in bad weather and all that kind of stuff play a part? We'll wait and see. But yeah, I would go Glasgow by like maybe 8 points.
Yeah, I'm looking at Stormers' team here. So I was a bit distracted. I was looking at a team here, and you look at the quality of some of the Stormers players, but I still feel like that Glasgow at home, Showtime, George Horn will probably get a hat-trick, let's face it. And with boys coming back, like the likes of Sione and Shuggy, like you're now British Lions. Well, not quite, but you get what I mean. But they've got the opportunity to say, this is why, this is what we're in. That weight is maybe off their shoulders. Selection's been not that they can relax by any stretch, but it's a chance to go, right, it's now time to get back to what I want to do. And the thought that they've got 3 games to go until they get on the Lions would be quite a nice thing. So let's have a crack. I just think there's a lot. There should be a lot of positivity around it. I know why folk like me and you can bump our gums and say they've been through a tough time recently, but I just feel like it's all coming to this point on Friday. They get that win, and all of a sudden everything's changed.
Yeah, totally. And I think you build momentum in. We talk about competitions. Six Nations is so important momentum-wise. I think these playoffs, you can almost deal with them as a separate competition. I feel pretty confident that's how Franco will be framing it. And actually, if Glasgow build up a bit of momentum with, they've done that with a performance against Leinster. Now they'll take that into this week, and he'll be saying, well, if we get one result, there's no reason we can't get 3. I think he said after the possibly one of the games, the last couple of games, that actually the weight of not being able to get a home run had maybe been weighing on the players' minds, and maybe that lifting is a bit of a freedom almost. I think that's, it means they're probably going to have to go to Dublin if Leinster beat Scarlets, which, with due respect to Scarlets and the result against Leinster a few weeks ago, you would fancy Leinster to win that. But, they did it the hard way last year. So, again, that was against the odds. So, I think there's no reason why we should sit here and write Glasgow off in a quarter-final.
Nah, I think they've got to go. I think the Leinster one, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. That's going to be a far tougher shift. Edinburgh Bulls, when you look at the 4 ties, I think is probably one of the harder ones to call. But because it's away, I'm guessing the majority of people, if you asked 1,000 URC supporters who's going to win that, I reckon the majority would be saying the Bulls, because it's away. Edinburgh's form away. The Bulls have, produced a couple of results recently. So I think it's a tough one, but Edinburgh have got some things to be excited about and lift their chins off their chest a little bit with players returning, and finish the season not necessarily on a high, but to beat Ulster was needed. The Bath performance was a higher intensity. The Sharks performance was at a higher intensity. Zebre will ignore, but there's some stuff there to be positive about.
Yeah, totally. I think Edinburgh will go to South Africa with almost, and I know that Sean and the players wouldn't say this publicly, but they've almost
they've packed for 2 weeks though. They're going for 2 weeks. That's what they want.
I mean, and you would be foolish to do otherwise, but I think you would say, well, let's throw the kitchen sink at it and see how far we get, because probably outside of that group, not many expect them to go further than Saturday afternoon. I think, Sean obviously has an in-depth knowledge and experience of playing against the Bulls, having coached the Sharks, so he'll know exactly what to expect. The players know exactly what to expect, having been there earlier in the season. And actually, my memory of that game is funny, because I had it in my head that Edinburgh were sort of well beaten and then scored a late try to bring the score really close, but they were in front with 15 minutes to go, and it was only they got held up over the Bulls line. If Edinburgh score that, I think they probably win at Loftus. And as it played out, the Bulls went 100 metres and scored, and it kind of changed the flow of the game. So I wouldn't like to predict. I think it'll be tough for Edinburgh. I think the Bulls are, but the Challenge Cup game that we watched at the Hive last month was Edinburgh dominated the first half, and then Jake White brought on Keenan Moody and Johan Hussen at half-time, and they totally, between the two of them, they totally changed the game. Hussen's injured, and I don't think he'll play again. There's questions whether he'll ever play again, sadly. But I think that's a massive, massive blow to them, and
yeah, definitely
will give Edinburgh a bit of a lift. I think Duhan coming back clearly gives Edinburgh a further lift. I think if they can get Grant Gilchrist fit and on the pitch, that makes a big difference. And I think hopefully all goes well with Glenn Young's partner, wife is due to give birth sort of imminently. So if all goes well there, I think there's a plan to fly him out on Thursday. So if Edinburgh can go as close to full strength as possible, then you never know. Never.
I'll be interested to see what Edinburgh do on the bench, because Sam Skinner and Marshall fronted up against Ulster without Gilco.
Yep.
But you've already mentioned Glenn Young. The back row, I'm interested to see what they go with. Scrum halves obviously got an interesting one with Benny Velicott and Charlie Shield both being out. I think that means Conor McAlpine.
It does. It does mean Conor McAlpine, which is a bit of a baptism of fire for him. But
I saw him at school. He was at Watson's, and what a rugby player, and his kicking is exceptional. Mike Kerr has done a lot of work with Conor, and he was a very good footballer. But I can see there's a bright future there. But yeah, to go and listen, son, here you go. And when I was a coach and making decisions, I remember one of my toughest decisions was, and I asked the players who they thought should sit on the bench, and they said one person. I said, right, if our starter goes down in the first minute, who do you want? And they changed their tune. They went for the guy they liked to the guy that they actually thought was the best player. If Ali Price gets smacked like he has done a couple of times, and all of a sudden Conor McAlpine's got to play 78 minutes, go for it, son. But you never know, because Jack Brown's shown it, and a few others, especially when you've not got time to think about it. If you're told, you're going on in the 60th minute, you've got 60 minutes to worry about it. If it's right, let's go. One of the things I saw and I've got it up in front of me, the URC social media, and it was the playoffs probability. I don't know if you saw this.
I did.
It's one, and it's the Oval Insights algorithm. The probability of the 8 teams left to win: Leinster 41%, which I don't think anybody's going to. And now they have to win, having exited Europe. They have to win. The Bulls, and then it gets really close. The Bulls 14%, Glasgow 12%, Munster 11%. And then Edinburgh are 8% above the Sharks, who are 7%, the Stormers, who are 4%, and the Scarlets, who are 2%. Now, I've got no clue how any of that works. But, Bulls are second. But they're only 6% more than Edinburgh to go and win the whole thing. Like, those things are stupid, but like it's Moneyball going too far. But Edinburgh have got a real shot. Like, let's not. If it had been in December, we would probably thinking they'll be on their way home. But now we're at a point where Edinburgh have got a proper shot here, not to win the whole thing necessarily, but to win. Let's go one step at a time. But to win at the weekend, it's a proper shot.
Totally. And if you look at what would Edinburgh want to face would they want to face a team, a Bordeaux, who are going to say to Damien Penaud and BLBRA, right, run everything from everywhere and let's just play. And it's going to be high tempo. And I'm not sure now, because Edinburgh have shown that physicality and their set piece, their lineouts struggled at times, but their scrum's been good. I think Edinburgh will think this is an opportunity. I think the injuries might be the deciding factor in whether, if they go into it with a sort of loaded team, they could do something special. I think if they get injuries and they end up, Sean was saying to us yesterday, the worst case scenario would be you'd have to play Magnus Bradbury in the second row. I think when you start having selections like that in a playoff match, you lose someone from somewhere else in the team, and that would be the concern. But as I say, how many people outside of Edinburgh Rugby think they're going to go to Pretoria and win? Probably not many. So it's a free hit, and I think they'll go and give it a good go. There's one point here that I think is interesting. When Edinburgh handled Pretoria's altitude, I think, to your point about the bench, Sean had said earlier in the season he didn't think they had the squad to necessarily adapt to a 6-2 bench. I think that probably is still the case. But is it something that they might think about this week? I think.
Well, you say that, but if you're talking about flying Glenn Young out, and the injury update they sent out said that Gilco will undergo a fitness test. Gilco's fine, right? If you're saying that, Gilco's fine. You're not putting that out. If come on, I think Gilco's fine. So I'm going. I think Pierre will start rather than Bohan. I think. So I'm going Pierre, Ashman, Ray, Sam Skinner, Gilco, and then I'm going Jamie Ritchie, Hamish Watson, Magnus Bradbury.
Yes.
Which then gives you the chance to bring on Ben Muncaster.
Yeah.
Bring on Marshall Sykes, Javan, Paddy Harrison, and Bohan. So that's 5. You have to carry a 9, which means Conor McAlpine plays, but I'm guessing Ali Price is likely going to play most of the game.
At altitude, that's a tough ask.
No, I know it is. And maybe I'm wrong. So then you've got a decision to make, because there's flexibility in that back line, in that Curry could go on the wing. There's not a huge amount at 15. Darcy potentially, but then if the ball's in the air and at altitude, I probably wouldn't fancy that. Because your back line is Husson, Darcy, Curry, Lang, Duan, Ross Thompson, Ali Price. The back line, I think, almost picks itself.
I think so, yeah.
With no Masesi, you lose a change, I think, in the centre. So I'm really interested to see what the bench is. Conor McAlpine plus Ben Healy was on the bench against Ulster. Is it Ben Healy? But then, so you then have Glenn Young makes a 6-2 bench. So you've got you finish the game with Venter, Harrison, Sebastian, Sykes, Young, Muncaster, and then one of, I reckon Maggie probably plays 80. So it's one of Jamie or Hamish to finish the game. McAlpine potentially at 9 for Ali Price. So you're only making one change in the back line. But I don't know who that would be. I'm not sure who that would be.
So then the point to that, I think the biggest risk, the biggest concern, certainly from the outside, would clearly be Duhan. He hasn't played for a long time. So
he's a left winger, mate. He stands and watches for 75 minutes.
He also is supposed to at least be the guy who is running after all these box kicks. That is likely, is the most likely. So do you then carry a guy like Mark Bennett who gives you cover in the centre and ask James Lang potentially becomes cover at 10? But then
Benzo would I think be my bench because he's a smart enough cat that he can pretty much play anywhere.
Yeah.
But then you've got Harry Pat. But then I don't know if he comes on, if Curry or Langer went down, I'm not sure who would play in the centre. I'm not sure. Like not Duan, Darcy, Goose, Harry, none that I'm aware of really have any pedigree in the centre.
Wes does quite a bit of out of 13. So Wes would be the one.
Not for a long time. Not Edinburgh.
Not for Edinburgh. No, at the Hurricanes, he played a bit at 13. So Wes would be the one. But again, you would be asking him to go.
But you wouldn't put Wes at 13 if you had Mark Bennett on the bench, because then you'd be putting Bennett to 15.
Yeah, exactly. So that's where Bennett's flexibility becomes a factor. But he's not played a lot of rugby either. So if you got an injury in the first 10 minutes, you'd be asking a guy who's played basically 15 minutes of rugby this season to go and play 70 minutes at altitude in a quarter-final with no possibility of a replacement. Otherwise, you're going to end up Ali Price on the wing.
So what are you telling me? So what are you telling me then? You've picked holes in it. What are you telling me?
I'm telling you, and I think I'm leaning towards Franco's strategy of, first of all, I think if Edinburgh are going 6-2, they have to have a 10 on the bench. I think if you've no 10 on the bench, so I'd go Ben Healy, because he could play fullback and Wes could move elsewhere if needed. I think, given what Sean said in the past, I think they'll go 5-3 and have Conor McAlpine, Ben Healy and Mark Bennett all on the bench.
I think you're probably right. But there's and I don't know what the game plan will be at altitude away from home against the Bulls, looking at who the Bulls have got. I don't know. Sean knows them better than any of us. There is a bit of me likes the idea of having those 6 on the bench that we can go full Boona. Let's really go for it. But yeah, the flexibility in that back line. Darcy gets scalped. Duan, maybe something happens. Yeah, it's exciting. I'm glad it's not us, and let's face it, it's never going to be. But it's an exciting time, and I think to go into a quarter-final, and at one point this season, you would think Glasgow are definite semi-finalists and Edinburgh are not even going to make the playoffs. To now be going into a weekend of quarter-finals where you think both teams have got a justifiable claim to go and win, it's quite a nice position to be in.
Yeah, totally agree. I think there's a real opportunity to end up with half the semi-finalists, which is a mad thing to say.
I tell you what, I've never thought of that, and what a way to put it.
Do you know?
For Scotland to supply half of the semi in anything, geez, it's quite a nice thing to have 100% in the Scottish Cup, but to have 50% in, that's quite cool, eh?
Yeah,
that's quite a nice thing. I like that.
Before we sort of digress any further, there's a question here. What TV station? Games are on both games. It's a bit of a plug, but both games are on Premier Sports. So Glasgow Friday night at 7:35, I think, and
I think
Edinburgh 12:30 on Saturday afternoon, both on Premier Sports. I think this one's interesting as well. Just before we move on, 2 of Northampton's undercooked back 3 went off. By the way, did you see the size of the strapping on George Furbank's arm? It was like
Scott Quinnell days.
Oh, it was unbelievable. It looked like one of the old Cougar forearm guards had been strapped up with all the tape that was left in the bag. Look, I think that's another consideration is Duhan yes, they said he would travel, and yes, he was in contention. Is he fit to play? You would hope so. He's the kind of guy that could give Edinburgh a real lift.
Duhan's good to go. I reckon he probably I reckon he possibly could have played against Ulster. So I think he's ready to rumble for this. And he's another one, a bit like I was saying about Sione and Shuggy. Right, Duhan, Lions selection's done. Let's get on with, Pierce. Pierce had his go.
Yeah, we've talked about, Sione and Mosese in the 1872 Cup, but Duhan's got a chance to go against his brother. So he'll want to play for lots of reasons, but there's also a chance to win that sort of family bragging rights.
And there's a lot of those boys. Bohan will be in the squad. I'm just looking at my team selection here. So Bohan's getting to play in South Africa. Pierre's getting to play in South Africa. Duhan's getting to play in South Africa. So you've got 3 boys getting to go and play. And the thought of, if you're looking for motivations, hang on, I can go to South Africa for a few days or I can go for 2 weeks. There's a pretty sizable motivation for everybody.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think there certainly won't be lacking in reasons to get motivated for. And actually, do you know what? They've gone through such a sort of period of struggling. The start of the season was poor, but actually this is the first time they've been back to South Africa since that Lions game. We haven't really talked about that. Different opposition, obviously, but a week before they probably should have beat the Bulls. And
how different life could have been.
And how different everything would have looked.
It could have been a home quarter final, and we could have been talking about we'll see at the Hive. Yeah, it's a funny old guy, mate. It's a funny old guy. Yeah, okay. So prediction, you said Glasgow by 8. You normally do this, but you've gone for one of them, so you might as well give us an Edinburgh prediction.
Oh, I've talked myself into being really optimistic and hopeful.
I know. What happened to miserable Gav?
I know. This always happens. This playoff time, and
Edinburgh will be thinking you like them now.
Yeah, well, there's every chance of that. Although I'm probably about to prove otherwise. I'm going to say home advantage. I think it'll be close, but the Bulls by 5.
Nah, I'm not having that. Darcy Graham George Horn hat-trick at Scotstoun, Darcy Graham hat-trick in South Africa, and another 2 fingers up to Andy Farrell. That's what I'm going for.
Which would you rather, with a sort of last-minute Lions call-up, Darcy or wee George? If you had
Sorry, George. It has to be Darcy, because otherwise his mother would leather me, and so would his mother-in-law, and so would his grandfather. His grandfather is John Slorence, who's an incredible Hoyt man. The kind of guy that can quote statistics at you from a game you played for Gala against Hoyt in 19 Canteen. Amazing folk. And his dad was a contender on Gladiator, so he would batter me. For Darcy, it would mean the world to both of them, but I would like them both to go, and Johnny Matthews. So there, I've all 3 of them.
Yeah, well, let's wait and see. Hopefully, Johnny Matthews. The injury update from Johnny was that he was sort of touch and go for the weekend, but he's become. I suppose we should talk about this as well. It leads on, but Johnny's become such an important player for Glasgow since George Turner left. But how good to have George Turner back in the UK and hopefully available again for Scotland. I think I've talked to
why are you not available for Scotland and Japan?
Yeah, so I think the reasoning was that their season doesn't start until autumn test time. But when it starts, they basically run right through. So the commitment would have been when he signed, basically, we expect you to be available the whole time, which then would have taken him out of all internationals and Six Nations contention. So I think it was more a logistics. And then also, I suppose if he flies back, he could in theory, or he would in theory, have to be released his club the following weeks. That's a slightly different prospect for somebody going to France than flights to and from Japan. So I think basically the decision was that he wouldn't be available, but I never got the impression that was him done, and I think he'll come back in pretty close to the top of the tree in that position.
I think it's an interesting statement from Harlequins, because he will be I think he's going to be an international rugby player.
Yeah.
Which means, there's that, it carries that risk. So they obviously see, and so I'm going to caveat this. I think they must see him as a very good or an excellent player to bring him back, knowing that it would mean he's available for Scotland. It's not a signing like Glasgow Newcastle often do, where they sign players that they know are not going to be away on international duty. And like you're saying about the club in Japan, we know we're going to get you for 80 minutes every week. No unions telling us we can't use you. You're not going to be away. You're not going to be a risk. So when we sign you, we know we've got you. So for Harlequins to take George Turner, and what an opportunity for him to, he's been to Japan. Great chance to go and see something else and do something else. And now he gets to come to Harlequins, live in London for a while, play in the Premiership. I'm really chuffed for him, because he's one of those guys who, not that he wasn't fancied, but he was never really spoken about. And, it took a long time for him to find his place. And now you see the love on the Harlequins post about him coming back, and folk going, oh, yes, he's back. I think it's brilliant. What a guy.
Yeah, great. And I think if there's a club, I actually didn't sort of put two and two together, but if there's a club that I actually think George Turner would do well at, I think he suits the way Quins historically have liked to play. He's good in the loose, but his sort of nuts and bolts, his throwing and stuff has improved a lot, I think, since he kind of burst onto maybe the international picture. I think he's got a lot about him. I think, as I say, he'll come back to Scottish concern. I would hope he would be on the summer tour, but if not then, certainly in November. Look, I think it's frustrating. And when we had Rob on and we did the Big Lions predictions, we basically picked all the hookers, and we didn't mention a Scot. It was probably the only position we didn't even reference a Scottish player. I think he would have been in that conversation had he stuck around. So to have him back and see the kind of praise that has been heaped on him, I think is a good thing. So look, great to have him back, and we'll see how he goes at Quins.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing. Paddy Harrison will not be that happy, I wouldn't have thought, but
I would imagine there's quite a few that won't be that happy. Dylan Richardson obviously joining Edinburgh in the summer. We wonder what Dave Cherry's move to France means for his international career. But Ewan Ashman has obviously had an up and down season. Johnny Matthews clearly seems out of favour with Gregor. There's a lot of bodies there, but we'll wait and see who kind of stacks up. But good to have another option towards the top of the class in George.
Nice. Love it. Okay, enjoy yourself in Glasgow and watching the telly on Saturday. Good to chat to you, big fella. We'll speak to you soon. A final word from our sponsor. Scotland Rugby News Podcast was brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, then head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV today. With thousands of jobs across Scotland, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs, so you can start your search now. All the best, big chap. Speak to you soon.